Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Keith O'Nyans. I'm chair of the BGS board, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you all to this stakeholders event, and the first, but possibly not the last, that we are holding virtually. So a warm welcome. So today, the aim is to present to you some of the BGS activities that have taken place over the last 18 months or so, but most importantly, to offer you the opportunity to engage with BGS, with questions to presenters and to the panel that will be discussing and presenting on the Net Zero Challenge. Just to kick off, I want to make just a very few brief remarks about governance. Over the last couple of years of BGS activity, they have taken place under somewhat different governance arrangements. BGS remains a public sector body and part of NERC UKRI, but for the first time has operated with its own board. And in effect, with that board, and it operates under a memorandum of understanding with NERC UKRI, and in effect, it has responsibility for the BGS business plan and its delivery, including ensuring the financial sustainability of BGS. And you can see the membership of the board. I only want to go through this very quickly just to provide you with a sense of the background and skills that are present in the BGS board aimed at delivering on that undertaking under the MOU. The first thing is that we have two BGS executives as members of the board, obviously Karen as director and Andrew McConaughey, head of operations. There are two members of the board who are from outside the UK. Those are Donna Kirkwood, and she was, until recently, Chief Scientist at Resources Canada and the Geological Survey of Canada, and Olivier Perret, who's the chair of Schlumberger in France. We have two members who are closer to the public sector and academia. Michael Dixon, who's long-term director of the Natural History Museum in London, very recently moved to academia in Oxford, and Richard Williams on the bottom there, who is the Vice Chancellor of Heriot-Watt, where of course we have the BGS sharing with the Lyell Centre. We have two other members here who are from the world of business and corporate finance. They're David Simpson, on the bottom left there, former KPMG partner, and Joanna Wilson, who is in finance at Shell currently with Anglo American. So that gives you a sense of the range of skills that have come together in this board to deal on its commitment to NERC UKRI. And we have Alison Robinson on the bottom right there. Formerly, Alison is an observer from NERC, although Alison actually does participate fully in all of our discussions as a core board member. If I could have the next slide, please. Not the most interesting things to look at, organograms, at the start of a scientific presentation. I only want to make a couple of brief points here. The first is that I think it's a self-evident slide, but to note that BGS remains part of NERC UKRI, even though it has a much higher degree of autonomy and independence than it did have. And the BGS director, of course, has a direct report to the Chief Executive, Duncan Wingham, at NERC. These things work, and this, I think, works because of the clarity of the relationship between the BGS board on the one hand, the executive of BGS on the other, and the accountability through an MOU and reporting to NERC and the Chief Executive, Duncan Wingham, who has been particularly supportive and helpful in ensuring this clarity of this relationship. So that's all I want to say about that. We're more than 2 years in now on the board, but let me go to the more important thing and introduce to you Karen Hanghay. And just to note that it's a real pleasure to introduce Karen. She joined us only in autumn 19 in succession to John Ludden. And this followed a very international career for Karen, which spanned research in the US at Columbia, Woods Hole, the Denmark, Greenland, and the Geological Survey, and latterly the EIT for raw materials, and also some periods in business consultancy. So without more ado, I can say the BGS is delighted to build such a good relationship with Karen, and it's my pleasure to pass you over now to Karen for her presentation. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Keith. And thank you to everyone who has joined us here today. As Keith mentioned, it is I'm rather new at BGS. I've been on board for a little bit more than a year. And so this, of course, is my first stakeholder event. And to be completely honest with you, this year and a little bit at BGS for me has not looked quite the way I thought it was going to look. And basically, what I had on my agenda for 2020, after I'd sort of done the first immersion, arriving in the late fall at BGS, my plans for 2020 was really to engage very strongly with all stakeholders, and I have been able to meet some of you before we went into COVID lockdown, and I've also been able to meet some of you via Zoom. But of course, it hasn't been quite the same. We had also hoped, we postponed this stakeholder event a couple of times, hoping that we would be able to actually meet in person and have a dynamic discussion with a variety of stakeholders. And finally, we've sort of come to the conclusion that we need to revert to the second best, which is this option here, where we have a webinar. And of course, that's going to be perhaps a little bit more one way. You're going to get some information, but hopefully you will use the opportunity to ask questions after the presentations and during the panel. And if there isn't enough time for actually open discussion, which I'm guessing there isn't, then of course you're very welcome to reach out to anyone at BGS, and we can continue the conversation outside of this forum here. So the way we're going to do it today is that I'm going to sort of do a little bit of the sort of current status, if you will, a snapshot of where we are and what we've been up to over this last couple of years. And then we'll have a little bit of a Q&A session on that. And then we'll have a little bit of deeper dive into one of our projects. And after that, we'll have a panel where we hopefully can look also a little bit towards the future and engage directly with you. So you see our vision and mission statement here on the slide. So our vision is for a safer, more sustainable and prosperous planet and a future based on sound geoscientific solutions. The mission is to provide impartial and independent geoscience advice and data. This is completely fundamental to everything that we do. To do that, we observe, monitor, and characterize geological environments, and we use our various abilities in Earth system science to do so. We also build strategic partnerships with many of those who are listening in here today and others, academic institutions, governments, industry, and the public, to make sure that we sharpen our approach and also share our expertise. Next slide, please. So this is where we are. We pretty much have facilities all across the UK. You can see here our 5 main offices across all of the devolved nations. And on top of that, we have several observatories and an information point in London as well. So we try to be present, of course, in many different places. And as you can see on the left, we are about 650 total staff, which of course means that during the last year or so, we've actually been present pretty much in 650 different locations across the UK. Of that staff, about 450 are science staff and 200 are support staff, enabling us to actually deliver our science. Next slide, please. So our role, Keith mentioned the MOU, and this is how our role sort of more or less is described in the MOU. I've cut a few words out here to make it simpler. Basically, we provide the National Repository of Data and Knowledge for Geoscience in the UK. And this is a unique function that only we actually have. We develop services and provide impartial and independent geoscientific advice to the government, to industry, and to the public. We provide analytical facilities, including our observatories, some of which was on that map you just saw, in support of earth science research and government needs. We deliver UK leadership and make our skills, expertise, and knowledge available globally. And we do research and development in pursuit of all of those aims. And that's, of course, to make sure that we have the most current knowledge and the credibility that we need to be able to fulfill our mission. Next slide, please. So this is how we actually sort of have organized our science, or the way that we work with our science. This is based on a sort of refreshed strategy that came in 2019, Gateway to Earth. And basically, in this strategy, we try to frame the work that we deliver around the UN Sustainable Development Goals and around societal challenges, so that we can be part of the solution to some of those societal challenges. And the three challenges you can see sort of in dark blue on the right here, it's environmental change, adaptation and resilience, it's multi-hazards and resilience, and it's decarbonization and resource management. Sort of underpinning all of that is our digital transformation, our entire operational side, and also our national and our global geoscience that goes across all of the three challenge areas and delivers on them within the UK, but also in a global context. And I'm now just going to focus in and give you like 3 examples, and it's really very superficial, but there will be, as I said, a slightly deeper dive a little bit later on. I'll just briefly introduce sort of 3 things that we're working with to give you a flavor of that. So if I have the next slide, please. So this one is part of the decarbonization resource management area. Part of that area is looking at, of course, energy resources, but also mineral resources. And sometimes those overlap quite a lot, as is the case for cobalt, which is a vital metal for the energy transition. Currently, we're using around 50% of cobalt globally for battery use. And because batteries and storing of energy is such a big part of the green transition and moving towards net zero, basically we are expecting a 3-fold increase in the global cobalt production by 2030. So this is only this is less than 10 years away that we are going to see a 3-fold increase. And basically, we monitor this and we study this and we try to understand it as much as we can. And there's just been a very recent study that has actually been published only this year that is looking at cobalt deposits in Europe. And this is it's a great resource. And the reason, of course, that we need to look at why and where we can find cobalt in Europe is this map that you see here, which is from a report that was published in 2019 on the cobalt sort of global picture. So looking at production, looking at very importantly, material flow and streams, because this explains a lot of the demand side and a lot of the shortages and lots of the scarcity that we see in different parts of mineral value chains. And as you can basically see, the sort of take-home message here is there's a bunch of arrows here, and the size of the arrow and the color of the arrow shows you how much is actually moving along that path. And as you can see, almost all of the global production of cobalt is based in Africa, and almost all of that is flowing into China, where it's put into products that can then flow across the world. So we do many studies like that. This is part of the work that also goes into the annual mineral statistics handbook that we publish at PGS. Next one, please. Something completely different here. Contamination trends preserved in the River Thames mud. This is part of the challenge area, environmental change, adaptation, and resilience. And what you can basically see here is Chris Vane sampling mud in the Thames. And by doing so, by taking cores here, BGS scientists have been able to basically track something like 80 years worth of contamination history, heavy metals, other contaminants, and basically provide a picture of how the contamination has evolved in the environment and possibly help deduce some of the causes for that. As part of this study, it's really, the really important thing is looking forward and using some of the things that we learn from a study like this to be better at developing new methods for emerging contaminants that we haven't actually even started to worry about yet, but that may become a problem in our environment as we move forward. Next slide, please. A third example here is from our global geoscience area. And this is a project that has been ongoing for quite a few years, mapping basically the subsurface of Singapore. So usually when we do geological maps, we actually go and look at the surface and then we make predictions of what lies underneath. And when it comes to cities, that is much, much harder to do. So many different methodologies went into this, but quite importantly, many of us, when we think about cities, we think about the sort of urban structures on top of the subsurface, but very much of the city is actually located below. It's the transport systems, our waste systems, our water systems, our vulnerabilities to things like subsidence. And so this study, along with actually quite a few other studies that BGS is undertaking, especially in Asia, in large cities, has helped BGS really develop an expertise in this sort of new emerging field of urban geology. And we're right now actually chairing the expert group on urban geology for Eurogeosurveys, which is a sort of club of geological surveys from all across Europe that we, of course, are members of as well. Next picture, please. Those were the sort of three science area examples that I was just briefly going to touch on. But then a very important thing that is happening at BGS and in the UK right now is the UK Geoenergy Observatory. So this is a facility that we are building along with stakeholders across the UK. And so basically this represents a £31 million investment from the government to create 2 underground geo-observatories. So again, we think about observatories as something above the ground that's pointing up. These observatories that go into the ground, pointing down, allowing us to study the subsurface in real time and also do experiments on them. This, I think, we'll hear a little bit more about in the panel later on, where we will talk about the way to net zero and how BGS can contribute to that. But this basically will become working facilities for everyone in the geoscientific community. And where it stands now is that the Glasgow site is finalized, it's built, and it's collecting data. Our core scanning facility is up and running, and we are currently looking at how to proceed with the Cheshire site. Next slide, please. And just sort of a little bit of data coming out of the Glasgow site. What you can see here is basically the sort of seismicity going back to, I want to say this goes back a little bit more than a year, maybe a year and a half. And what you can see here is seismicity on weekdays, the high ones, and weekends are the low ones as you move across this curve. And then here in the pink dashed line here, we have the COVID government lockdown happening in late March of last year. And quite interesting, because these instruments, of course, are picking up data all the time, we could see an immediate sort of decrease in activity. And what we could actually also quite interesting see is that this quite large difference between weekends and weekdays have also been somehow diminished. So our weekends and our weekdays are a lot more alike, with all of us working from home. So again, I think you'll hear a little bit more about that in the panel discussion later on. Next slide. We are looking at the possibility of contributing to new test sites from BGS's side. We're currently doing a scoping study on a onshore to offshore CO2 storage testbed that we will look at whether there is a need for it. And if there is, we'll look at how we could probably move forward with something like this. Again, this would be for a very wide group of users and together with a lot of different stakeholders. And also we're looking at expanding the geothermal heat storage testbed in the Glasgow area, also currently doing a scoping study to do so. Next slide, please. Now, away from the science and some a little bit more of the numbers and the metrics, this is something about our publications in 2020. We had 555 publications coming out of BGS, more than 300 of those being peer-reviewed publications, but some of them also being reports and white papers and things. The repository for research publications and outcomes of the NERC Research Center's NORA is collecting data on all of the products that we publish. And as you can see here, we actually in 2020 we had 322,562 downloads of our publications on NORA. So I think this is really quite remarkable and shows that our products are really used by many of you and probably for many different reasons. And in actually these downloads, BGS is responsible for 11 of the top 20 downloads during that time. Next slide, please. We also do have, sort of aside from the challenge areas, we have we also are prioritizing innovation and set aside a separate budget for that to allow sort of really innovative ideas and bubbles to be tested fairly quickly, and also allowing our staff to come up with sort of ideas that might be crisscrossing our different challenge areas in ways that we hadn't necessarily imagined that they would. And basically in 2019-20, we spent about 450K on these types of innovation projects. We funded 21 ideas, and that led to 18 projects and 16 of which were completed. And again, this is innovation. So things actually not being completed is not necessarily a bad thing. We also want ideas to fail, or we aren't actually pushing the envelope quite hard enough. More than 100 staff have been involved in these different projects. And as part of this program, we're also doing some formal training, innovation training for our staff. And we've had actually 12.1% of our staff participate in that. Next slide, please. The digital transformation is another one of these things that go across all of our challenge areas or underpin it. And we published, as sort of a part of our overall strategy, we published a digital first strategy last year. And you can download that on our website if you're interested in knowing more about that. We are importantly a very proud member of the Geospatial Commission, a partner in the Geospatial Commission, which of course is helping putting geospatial data on the agenda in the UK and helping has developed a strategy for geospatial data for across the UK. And we of course are wanting to contribute to that and see it as a great opportunity to work together with the Geospatial Commission and other partners in the Commission as well. We basically issue more than 200 new data licenses every year. And we have more than 1,000 different organizations that are assessing our data with some kind of BGS data agreement. And this means that we receive about 3 million in compensation every year through this data licensing. And we're putting that back into our national capability funding and help making that be part of us being able to collect new data and create new products for everyone. Next slide, please. Another thing sort of on the more internal lines here is that we, of course, are passionate about sustainability at BGS, and we're passionate about our research and our projects contributing to sustainability across the UK and actually globally. But we also want to be sustainable about the way we work ourselves. So we have had a project last year looking at how we can become more sustainable in the way we work. We're looking at how we can upgrade our estates to be better, reduce waste and utilities consumption, increase biodiversity, and have a more sustainable infrastructure. We're looking at our working practices, low carbon working, procurement, environmental responsibility. Also, of course, some of how we work with our external stakeholders. And finally, on our travel, we are looking into that environmental impact of our business travel. How can we cut emission costs? How can we change the way we work? I think this pandemic has been a good indication of some of the things that we can do in the future. And with that, we're working on also a cultural change in BGS with the attitude towards travel. Next slide, please. This is our people. I think in the last slide, it said 641. So I don't know if 2 people joined in the meantime, but we have a staff of around 650. We have a pretty equal gender distribution. And we do have also started work looking at diversity going much, much beyond gender. I think so traditionally in geosciences, this has been how we've thought about diversity. But I think we all know now that this is not good enough and we really have to do better. And we are striving to do that. BGS, we installed an EDI committee a couple of years ago, and there's several projects underway with them to try to find ways for us to improve our inclusivity, and also look at our history and some of the products that we've acquired over our very long tenure at BGS. Next slide, please. Finally, a little bit about our budget. We get about half of our budget. We get 30 million. This is again from 1920. 30 million directly from NERC for the national capability, our public science role. However, about 6 million of this is for national facilities, so they're completely sort of flow through. And about 24 of them goes directly into funding our facilities and the work that we do on our national capability. In other income, we get pretty much the same, another 24 million. And that income you can see broken down below here. So this is the other income, and you can see where that comes from. There's a little bit that comes from this data licensing and sales from our shops and rent from our estates. We get some money from the European Commission. We get some from foreign public and private sector and projects that we have abroad. We have some further NERC income, which is related to projects, so competitively won projects with partners. And then we have about 4 million from other government departments that very strongly help us contributes to this public science role. The same with the UK public sector of 1.92 million, and then finally 3.2 million from the private sector, and that's largely the university sector in the UK. So again, it's largely research projects that we do with partners elsewhere. Next slide, please. So before I sort of stop, I think we need to just sort of briefly perhaps look ahead a little bit. So what are the challenges and the opportunities that lie ahead? And first of all, one of the challenges that I think we've all had this year is, of course, the COVID crisis that we have all had to deal with. At BGS, we have been able to uphold most of our work. We did have a period back in the early spring last year in March and April and May, where we were completely shut down for almost all of our activities that could not be done from home. But since late May of last year, we have been able to go ahead with some key laboratory activities and some key fieldwork activities that have helped us basically deliver and move our projects forward as this year has sort of moved on. Looking ahead, we will get again more to that in the panel presentation a little bit later, but we'll have a COP26 meeting taking place in the UK this year. So this is on our agenda, and we're preparing for that pretty much as we speak, together with our colleagues in other centers in NERC, our colleagues in the Geospatial Commission, and our stakeholders, and of course, everywhere in the UK. And of course, in a sort of slightly longer term than that, this is almost sort of leading into us really looking ahead to taking a very active and critical role in helping provide solution for powering the net zero future that we want to see. And again, we will pick up on that in the panel discussion that will start in a little while. And I think that was my last slide. It was indeed. So I'm going to say thank you, and I think we have a little bit of time for questions.
Hi there. Yes, so I'm going to field a few of the questions that we have coming in from our audience. So to start off with, how do you see the impact of Brexit on BGS in terms of funding, collaboration, and attracting the best young scientists from across Europe?
That's the $1 million question. I don't think anyone has the complete answer to that, but I will say that with the agreement now that the UK will be part of Horizon Europe, I don't think that we will see much change in how we work with our European colleagues. How exactly it's going to impact recruitment, of course, is a little bit difficult to predict because that goes beyond, you could say, sort of the research funding mobility across Europe and the UK. But BGS is continuing to work with our European colleagues, and we will continue to be member of Eurogeo surveys. And so I'm not foreseeing a whole lot of change here.
Okay. Our next question, or would you like to come in that, Keith?
Yeah, only to agree with Karen. I mean, Karen showed a slide of how much formal income that BGS receives from the EU. It's significant. Probably the more important facet, had we not continued to be a member of EU programs, would be the cultural shift. I think that's probably unlikely to be as dramatic as now as we may have thought. And a great deal of it is the willingness to collaborate. And I suspect that will continue. And I suspect the UK will continue to be a very attractive place to undertake research in geosciences.
Excellent. Our next question, what do you see as BGS's role in supporting a green recovery from COVID-19?
Another big question. I think BGS does have a very large role to play in the green transition. And I think what COVID has perhaps done is that it has really accelerated our thinking about how we can progress the green transition. And I think when it comes to BGS's role, it is quite clear, and I think this will again be discussed a little bit in the panel, but it's quite clear that any of the solutions to the green transition challenges that we have, anything to do with storing energy, heat, CO2, anything to do with being able to build alternative energy, wind turbines, all these things, all of these start in the subsurface. So it's clear to me that BGS can play an extremely important role in supporting that transition. And I don't necessarily think that this has changed that much because of COVID, but I think that it may have been accelerated. And so hopefully we'll see a greater push towards finding some of those solutions and implementing some of the types of things we need to be able to accelerate it, such as these test beds that we are currently starting to operate and other types of infrastructure like that.
Excellent. Our next question. Are you happy with the mix in BGS work between research and applied and between UK work and international work? And how do you see that changing?
I am, yes. That's so the very short version is I think we have a really good balance at BGS. I think as I know that we have colleagues here from other geological surveys, and all the geological surveys do these things slightly differently, but we are amongst that group of surveys that do have external income, and that actually allows us to build critical research mass in areas that we may not always be able to support as much if we were just completely on, you could say, sort of ring-fenced funding directly from government. So I think that being able to attract research funding and being able to participate in competitive research with external organizations is very important for BGS. But we also have, of course, this public science role that's extremely important that we need to deliver on. And so we have a remit that's different than a lot of the people that we do this research with. So it's really creating the, you could say, the credibility, the critical mass, and the skill sets that we need to help deliver on supporting finding solutions to the challenges. And that's the sort of more applied side of things. But the applied side of things always have to stand on the more basic research. So I think we have a good balance there. And I think our global work, our international work is extremely important, because that helps us also build skills, and it helps us actually promote some of these sustainable solutions that we would like to see implemented across the globe as quickly as possible.
Okay, our next question. What level of interest have you had over the last year from UK government about copper and battery metals?
A lot, I will say. I think, batteries is I was about to say it's the new black, but it's not. It's the new green. And so I mentioned a little bit with the cobalt study that we've done. Batteries is extremely important for the entire green transition, because whatever means we use to generate energy, we're going to have to transport, and we're going to have to store it. And to do that, we need copper, and to do that, we need battery materials. So we do have a very active dialogue with the government, but also with again, external partners across the globe about how we can secure these materials and how we can ensure that we can provide the right advice to governments and to industry on how to progress that agenda.
Okay, we have time for probably 2 more questions. Our next question says that I can see the Green Bridge of Wales in the wall in Karen's office, one of Wales's important geodiversity sites. What role do you see BGS playing in UK geoconservation?
I think that we have a public science role, and I think that is something we must take very seriously, and that is related to these solutions and help finding solutions, but it is also basically helping support the entire sort of geoscientific community and beyond in the UK. So we have a very big, we sort of like the BBC of geosciences. We have that public service role. So I think we have a very big role to play in all things outreach, all things information, all things preservation, together with other stakeholders.
Okay, we'll have one final question. Does BGS support UK mineral exploration and mining for critical metals required for the green energy transition? Is it not also our social and environmental responsibility to source local if possible?
Well, I have to be careful here. I know that we want to, I know we want to address this in the panel as well. Whether we support mining, that is sort of a loaded question, because we are not sort of actively saying we think we should be mining here, or we're going to put money into mining, or anything like that. What we do is we provide impartial advice and data and knowledge about the subsurface and about the materials that we need in society, so that the people who have to make these decisions can make an informed decision and make the best possible decision. But we do support that, and we support that very actively, and we try to stay on top of what are what are the very important questions right now. So we really try to sort of listen in and sort of say, what do we think that politicians and industry are going to need to know a little bit into the future? But we also actually have an obligation, and I know that I can see that there are many questions here that we won't get to, but there's also been questions about, why do you, should you do to what extent should you support hydrocarbon research, all these kinds of things. But we do need to maintain that sort of, again, critical mass that we can step up and provide that impartial advice in pretty much any field in the geosciences and related to any resources that may be available to society. It doesn't mean that we will necessarily exploit these resources as a society, but to make those decisions, we need to have that impartial advice and the data that we need to support it.
Okay, thank you. That's all that we have time for in terms of questions now. There will be opportunities to ask the other panelists questions later on. Yes, Karen.
There is actually one question that I maybe would like to answer, if I could just use 1 more minute on it. And it's a question about the access to our data. And I can't actually see it now, so I forget the exact wording of it. But, to what extent we're considering the way we share data with the public, but also with companies. And I wanted just to say on that, because this is a really crucial thing. Almost everything that we do ends up in some flavor of data package, because this is how people can actually access the information and use the information in the best possible way. And we've actually, right now, we're undertaking a major review process of how we deal with data. So the way that we collect and distribute data and the business models for how we do it. So this is an ongoing, it's just starting up, and it'll probably take a little bit of time, but we actually, partly inspired by our work with the Geospatial Commission, we think it's very timely for us to have a good and hard look at that. So we are doing that. And then I will be quiet, Eileen, sorry.
Okay, that's excellent. Anyone who has posed questions that we haven't been able to answer, we can contact you after the event if you would still like an answer. I'm now going to hand over to Dr. Colm Jordan, who's going to talk about the Meteor project.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Colm. As you can see from the slide, I hope on the bottom left, I have 3 roles in BGS, but today I've got the honor of talking to you about a project called Meteor, for which I am the principal investigator. I feel I should apologize, because if you tuned in hoping to hear about rocks hitting the atmosphere, this isn't what I'm talking about today. I guess the second apology is that Karen in introduction mentioned that we're going to have a deep dive into the science in this project. I think it'll be more of a toe in the water at this stage with the 15 minutes that I've been allocated, but hopefully you'll see some of the amazing things we're doing in BGS and the impact we're getting from the science we're doing with BGS and with our partners across the world. So here we go. Meteor stands for Modeling Exposure and Multi-Hazards through Earth Observation Routines. It is a 3-year program funded to £3.5 million. In fact, it's 3 years and it's due to finish at the end of next month. So we're at the stage now where we can share some very exciting, interesting results with you. It's co-funded by the UK Space Agency through their International Partnership Programme, which is part of their Official Development Assistance funding through the GCRF programme. And BGS leads the international consortium that is doing all of this work. So unfortunately, I can only see half of my screen because I've got my picture of myself, which is disturbing, on half of the screen, but I can see most of the equation. This equation looks quite basic, but it is fundamental to what we're doing in this project, but also in BGS in our new challenge area, multi-hazards and resilience. So the equation talks about multi-hazards, exposure, vulnerability, and how that takes us to risk and resilience on the right-hand side. So what does this actually mean? In the Meteor project, we're focusing on 4 hazards: earthquakes, floods, landslides, and volcanoes. We're looking at characterizing the events, how they occur, where they occur, and the impacts that they have, but not just the hazards on themselves, but how they interact. So, for example, how earthquakes can trigger landslides, how landslides can block a river, leading to a flooding episode. So how these all interact, how these cascade, how they happen over time and over space. And we looked at this normally over site to global scale. In this case, we're focusing on 2 countries, Nepal and Tanzania, with our partners in those countries. However, exposure takes us to the next stage of this. Exposure in this case is the idea of where buildings are and what they're made of. So are they, for example, made of reinforced concrete? Are they timber framed? What are they built of? And where are they? How many are there? What's the rebuild cost? These are huge questions that we don't have answers to in many parts of the world. And this photograph here is from Kathmandu in Nepal, taken just last year. And you can see that there are still wooden struts holding up buildings following the Gurkha earthquake in 2015, where BGS did a lot of work with counterparts in the country and UK government to help build resilience to that event and to future events. Vulnerability talks about, once we know what these buildings are made of, how will they be impacted by these hazards over here? So how will an earthquake affect these buildings? How will a landslide or volcanic event affect these buildings? So once we get to these three facets, we can then look at how we can deliver robust information to make informed decisions, both in BGS in the UK and internationally. So the global context for this, it's quite terrifying, really. The graphs show us that there's reported disasters have increased over time. There's lots more happening. Not only that, but the impacts of those financially have increased over time as well. You get big spikes for large events like Haiti and where the Nepal earthquake happened as well. But over time, the impact financially has increased. This is mainly due to the fact there is more exposure. There's more buildings. Buildings cost more. So when an event happens, it has a bigger financial impact on those exposures, on those buildings, and the people who live in them as well. And people who live in them is what this figure on the top right is really focusing on. It's the expected mortality rate over the next 10 years across the globe from disasters. And it's quite terrifying that the areas which have the poorest data, which are often these ODA countries, official development assistance countries, will have the highest mortality rates in these events. So BGS is key to working with these countries to make sure that we have better and more robust information to help make decisions to plan for future events and respond to events as they occur. And this is also part of the UN Sustainable Development Goals and the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction that we're key to working with as well to make sure that we can have a good response and a good planning for these events should they occur in the future. So the consortium is a set of people who have worked across the disaster life cycle over many decades. We've worked together in many projects globally, internationally. The two key ones I'd like to point you to are NSET, the National Society for Earthquake Technology in Nepal. Their motto is making earthquake-safe communities in Nepal, not only for earthquakes, but for other hazards. So these are the guys who have a large amount of interest in developing the science, developing the understanding on how hazards, multi-hazards occur, so they can advise government in Nepal and agencies in Nepal to plan for future events. The logo beside that is the Disaster Management Department in Tanzania. This is the Prime Minister's office, and their role is to gather data in, gather information in for Tanzania so they can make informed decisions on these events. So we have got collaborators who we're working with from the science side and on the policy side from various scales across the globe. So there's a lot happening in this slide, and I can only really briefly describe it. But this is to give an idea of the processes and the research that we're doing in the project and the outputs that we get from that as well. So when I use terms like novel applied research, that's could be a buzzword that just is a catch-all for many things, but it's things like working with partners to understand how landslides, for example, occur, where they occur, what the triggering mechanisms are, how we can actually map those better in the future. One great way of doing this is using Earth observation data from drones and satellites to map things like the buildings, what the buildings are made of, but also where landslides have occurred, where flooding has occurred, and events like that. We don't use those on their own. We also have in situ data collection with teams like the humanitarian OpenStreetMap team who collect new data on what buildings are made of, where they are, where landslides have occurred, and the effects of those landslides in past events. Working with experts both in the UK and overseas to get a better understanding of all of these features, and then going into geospatial modeling, machine learning and AI to draw all this data together to make robust answers that we can understand the certainty and calibration of the outputs that we get. We've come across many data sets in the past where they look like they're well informed, but then we try and use them and find out that they're not actually suitable or fit for purpose. So part of this project is making sure that the data sets are robust, all the protocols are freely available, so anyone can analyze the data and the results and make sure that they are usable and fit for purpose for various scales. So what are we actually doing? What does it look like? For 47 countries, we have already produced exposure data, gridded data at 500 by 500 meters, telling us where the buildings are, what they're made of, what the rebuild cost is. And a deeper dive for Nepal and Tanzania, we have level 3 exposure data, We've collected new information on the buildings. We've worked with experts, structural engineers and other experts to collect new data in those countries to validate and calibrate the exposure data. We've collected vulnerability on the data on the buildings, what they're made of, how the building codes have changed over time. And we've collected hazard data at national scale so we can look at susceptibility and hazards to these hazards over time, and producing training materials working with our partners in those countries as well. So what does it look like? A quick review of this. Geographically, we've covered 47 countries across Africa here and across Asia. In these areas, you can click on any pixel, like I said, 500 by 500 meter pixels. You can get the rebuild cost for the buildings in those areas, what the buildings are made of, and how many buildings there are. So it is a very important, huge data set that we released back in October to align with UN Disaster Risk Reduction Day. And they're all available to download on the project website just over here. So you can see the geographic coverage is quite impressive. I hope you agree. Moving on from the exposure across the equation, we're looking at the hazards and multi-hazards. So for example, for Nepal, we have built national landslide hazard data for rainfall triggered events and seismic triggered events. This is derived from the work we did for UK government and NGOs in Nepal following the Gurkha earthquake, where we worked with other partners to collect thousands of landslide events, mapped those and worked out, for example, what type of pathologies are most acute when it comes to triggering landslides. We've got seismic hazard for Nepal as well, and flood hazard data for both fluvial and pluvial flooding in a bunch of return periods. What BGS is also leading is the multi-hazard modeling, and this is a critical new research area where we're trying to work out not just each of these single hazards and the impacts they have on lives and livelihoods and buildings, but if you put those hazards together, how can you actually weight them and produce a multi-hazard analysis on the landscape and on the exposure? Which takes us to vulnerability, the last part of that equation I showed you at the beginning, where we can do things like look at slight, moderate, extensive, and complete damage to buildings. And we've collected and developed vulnerability functions where we can look at, for example, the effect of floods on buildings. So for this flood, for example, at 1 meter, we'll say there's a 50% chance of collapse of that building with this building code. And we've done the same for landslides and earthquakes. The impact of this is we can actually make some really robust decisions using real evidence. So the first impact is robust data for risk analysis. So we can do things like looking at building codes in Nepal. So if the building is compliant with building codes, we will know that at a certain event of earthquake magnitude, 25% would suffer at least slight damage, whereas before that, 60% would suffer slight damage. So this type of data is really fundamental to governments, to various stakeholders like UNICEF, to understand the impacts of these events on lives and livelihoods. And we can start making real quantitative analyses of the data that we've produced. Not just that, but like I said, the impacts are that we can use this information to prepare for future events, to respond to events. This is an example from the portal run by the Ministry of Home Affairs in Nepal, where they use the data day in, day out to plan for events as they occur and to respond to events when they occur. Knowing, for example, if future aftershocks to occur, what areas are most likely to undergo landslides, for example. The third impact from the Meteor project can't really be underestimated. This is looking at more informed and strengthened stakeholders and actors. In this case, we're looking at scientific groups in Nepal who focus on the landslide events and working together to elicit new information on characterization of landslides and future events. And then taking that understanding, that data, to a policy level. And this is a group of ministries who are working with us in Nepal to take those data and make informed decisions. Likewise, in Tanzania, we've got new data being collected in Dar es Salaam on flooding with university partnerships, and then taking this to representatives from the Prime Minister's office to actually use those to make informed decisions. And then we also had in that meeting our friends, counterparts from Nepal. So both Nepal and Tanzania are working together to get best practice from the data that we are handing out and collaborating to produce for planning for future events and responding to events as well. The next steps, these should have been some really interesting, novel, fantastic steps where we would have gone to Nepal and Tanzania and worked closely with our counterparts again to deliver training materials, deliver events, deliver stakeholder workshops. But with 2 months to go, of course, we had hoped that COVID would allow us to travel. We still can't travel. So new research that we're doing in the project is looking at new ways to deliver joint workshops across Tanzania and across Nepal using events like this, using Zoom to deliver new ways of sharing and new ways of making sure that data do not sit on the shelf, but they're shared and used and they're fit for purpose by a variety of stakeholders across government. And that's my 12 minutes. Thank you very much. I will stop sharing my screen now.
Okay, we have time for just a couple of questions. If you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A now. We have one question just to start us off. Are there more natural disasters actually occurring, or is it just perhaps better reporting?
That's a very good question. It's a bit of both, really. We are unfortunately going through climate change as well. Climate change is making sure the effect is there's more rainfall in some territories. Monsoon is changing. We're getting larger cyclones coming across, say, Mozambique, large events like Hurricane Cyclone Maria coming across the Caribbean. So we are getting more events occurring, but they are also better reported as well. There's a lot of papers also on the terminology, natural disaster. The agreement now is that there actually isn't such thing as a natural disaster. There's a natural hazard, but disasters are not natural. They're man-made when they impact upon lives and livelihoods.
Okay, I have two questions here that I think I'll roll together. How do you see this work being scaled out to other locations, and what will happen to the project after the 3 years of funding ends?
Yeah, we are working closely with Nepal and Tanzania as lighthouse countries. They are unfortunate they have a lot of hazards that affect their populations, but they're also seen as leaders in their geographic areas. So by working with these countries, the counterparts can see the effects that robust data can have, how informed decisions can be made better with the types of data that we're producing, and hopefully people will learn from that and will like to collaborate on future projects. And that leads me to the second part of the question, which is how can we make sure that it's sustainable over time? I probably didn't make this clear enough in my presentation, but all the results were co-designed, co-developed and co-delivered with our partners in country. So it certainly wasn't us going in, having produced data here and handing it over and walking away. It's very much co-designed, co-developed. So partners in these countries are taking these data and actually doing more with it. And it's great to see, for example, groups in Nepal have taken the landslide hazard maps that we're working with, and they're applying those with their climate change models to see how the landslide hazard will change over time using climate change models. So they're taking what we've done and in fact going a step further, which is brilliant to be seen.
That's excellent. Thank you very much, Colm. I think that's all we've got time for. I'm going to hand over now to Professor Mike Stevenson, who will lead a panel on geoscience solutions for net zero.
Thanks very much, Ely. Could everybody turn their cameras on? Welcome everyone to this session on net zero. We're going to have a few very brief 2-minute talks just to warm everybody up, and then we'll have some time for questions, I hope, at the end. So I hope you've all read the government's energy white paper. Karen showed it earlier on at the beginning of her talk. I certainly have. It was published just last year in December. And it's really amazing how ambitious the UK's ambitions are for 2050, for decarbonisation and net zero. Basically, the government sees net zero as 3 challenges. One is decarbonising power and industry. Second one is decarbonising buildings. And the third is decarbonising transport. It's as simple as that. But that isn't really very simple. But it's interesting how important geoscience and BGS will be in those 3 elements. And we are going to concentrate on those three elements today. For power and industry, we have carbon capture and storage research. We have geological storage research for the hydrogen economy. We have grid scale energy storage research, for example, compressed air energy storage. We have work in decarbonizing the heating of buildings, so geothermal and heat storage. And we'll hear about that in a minute. We have work on the transport elements, so metals that will enable the energy transition, for example, metals that go into batteries. So the research that we're doing, and I will introduce the panel members next, will enable these 3 vital routes to net zero. So things like rock characterization, understanding the rocks, how we want to use them for new technology, or for how we need to understand them as having key materials in them for example, battery technology. Understanding how fluids flow in those rocks. understanding the geomechanical and geochemical changes that might occur due to new technology, new energy technology, like, for example, compressed air energy storage. And also understanding how to monitor these processes so we understand what's going on in the subsurface so we can reassure the public that this is being managed well. So knowing the extent of this challenge, BGS has put together an £8 million, 120 scientists decarbonisation and resource management challenge, which I lead. We have an unparalleled group of research facilities to help us with this, including the UK GEOS Glasgow, Cheshire and Cardiff observatories, and the Geoenergy Testbed near Nottingham. We are also, as Karen said earlier on, scoping out larger projects for NERC, for example, an onshore, offshore CCS test site and a geothermal and heat storage network. Both of these would be multi-million-pound facilities if we get them. So this group of scientists and facilities is the major national force for geological decarbonisation. There's simply nothing like this group anywhere else in the country. And what we've done today is brought together a few of the scientists who are leading aspects of this decarbonisation of power, industry, buildings and transport to talk to you today. So these are Jonathan Pearce on CCS, Corinna Abessa on geothermal, Alison Monaghan on our Glasgow UK GEOS test site, and Andrew Bloodworth, who's going to tell us a little bit about critical metals research. So I'll first of all hand over to Jonathan, and then we'll have some questions after the 5 speakers have spoken. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. So yeah, as Mike and Karen have said, CCS is widely recognised as a tool for mitigating climate change, for reducing emissions from industrial processes, so things like cement and fertilizer production, steel, petrochemicals, etc. It's also important for providing clean, flexible power in support of increased renewable penetration into the market. And also in the future, maybe the production of clean hydrogen to displace methane from the gas grids. So BGS has a long history of research in this area. We've undertaking research in CO2 storage for over 2 decades now. We really focus on 3 key issues. The first is around storage capacity. How much storage capacity are we going to need to meet UK's net zero climate ambitions? And this really builds on CO2 Stored, which is a free to access state-of-the-art online database of over 500 UK potential storage sites. And we're very proud of that. The second question is around containment. How do we demonstrate that CO2 has been stored permanently? How do we demonstrate that's going to remain safely subsurface for geological timescales? And if something did go wrong, in the unlikely event we did get some leakage, what would be the potential impacts of that leakage and how could we mitigate that? The third question is really around injectivity. How do we get the CO2 in there? How do we maximize the amount of storage that we can use, the utilization of the pore space effectively? How do we manage and control the potential interactions at a strategic level between different storage sites in one target formation? So we do all this research through a combination of lab and field experiments, numerical simulations and geological analysis, of course. We use our national facilities and we work in close collaboration with partners both in the UK, across Europe and indeed internationally as well. And as Karen and Mike have just mentioned, we're also very excited about working out a concept for a new deep research facility, a CO2 storage testbed, which we're doing on behalf of NERC and UKRI. In the future, I think we'll be looking particularly at carbon negative solutions and how we can utilize both bioenergy CCS and even direct air capture CCS. Although it's a low TRL immature technology at the moment, there is suggestions that this might be needed to create the sort of headroom for hard to decarbonize sectors in the future. And just finally, I'd just like to mention that we also work in other countries around the world, some developing countries where we're helping them to assess the feasibility of CCS, which is quite challenging, of course, when you think about the energy penalties and additional costs that come from that. And we're working, for example, with colleagues in India, both academic and industry colleagues there, to begin the conversations around the potential for CCS there. So with that, I'll hand over to Corinna.
Thanks very much. Corinna.
Thank you. I'm going to give you a brief run through geothermal, and I'm going to tell you why geothermal in the UK, where can we find it, and what is BGS doing on this topic. So geothermal energy is the energy stored in form of heat beneath the surface. It's homegrown, nationally secure, low carbon, green, and it provides a good alternative to conventional heating and power generation. So it is very important for net zero in the UK, especially for what Mike already mentioned, sort of the decarbonisation of buildings, so heating specifically. Where can we find it? The UK is not a traditionally geothermal country, so no steaming hot springs, no volcanoes, no active volcanoes, but we still have a considerable geothermal resource, and it's actually enough to provide 100 years of heating for the whole country, or even more. The systems can be found across all of the UK in a range of geological settings, depths, and at a range of temperatures. They include the low temperature heat resources stored in aquifers and disused mines at depths of a few tens of meters to a few hundreds of meters. And these are usually exploited with ground source heat pumps. At the other end of the scale, there are the geothermal systems in sedimentary basins at depths of 2 to 3 kilometers with temperatures hot enough to provide sort of district heating. And one example that you might be aware of is the Southampton scheme that's been operational for 30 years, feeding heat into the district heating system there. There's a few locations in the UK where we can generate power from the subsurface, and that sort of radio heat producing granites in Cornwall are one example of that. Now there is a varied resource, but I think overall it's not very well recognized and hence not very well used in the UK. So our research really, the BGS research really aims to support a wider recognition of that resource and the development of geothermal energy in the UK. And we're doing that through better characterization and assessment of the resource, understanding and minimizing environmental risk and impact, and providing evidence for policy and regulations. The specific areas we focus on are the geothermal resources in carboniferous basins. So that's the abundant mines, coal mines, as well as the carboniferous limestone, which is a deep geothermal target, which just hasn't been investigated very much. We look at urban heat resources, as well as supporting the development of a geothermal roadmap for the UK to get more strategic sort of commitment to developing the resource. So this is the why, where, and what of geothermal in a nutshell from me. And I hand over to Alison.
Okay. Thanks, Corinna. So I'm just going to say a few words about the observatory in Glasgow, the UK Geoenergy Observatory. So this is an underground laboratory for mine water heat and heat storage research. It's also an infrastructure where we can monitor environmental change and impact, and a place where people can come and develop new tools and methods. BGS operates the observatory as a NERC facility for world-class science into the decarbonisation of heat, and it's for both academic and commercial researchers to come and use. So utilising the warm waters in abandoned flooded coal mines could form a significant opportunity towards the decarbonisation of heat and net zero carbon emissions in the UK. So the observatory is an amazing space where we can do research and innovation around that. At the observatory, there are 12 boreholes ranging from 16 metres to 199 metres. They were constructed and tested between 2018 and 2020. And the mine water boreholes in particular are instrumented with a range of downhole sensor cables and loggers. They're available for researchers to come and use for pumping, testing downhole tools, sampling, and so on. So, for example, the different sensor systems will help us to image small-scale changes in flow and heat in the underground. There's lots and lots of open data already available from the observatory on the UK GEOS website, including environmental baseline data such as ground gas data, the seismic monitoring data we saw before, and ground motion data. So there's a big opportunity at the observatory to undertake practical science, and this will grow the evidence base at an at-scale facility through time in unprecedented detail on how to transfer heat sustainably and economically from the subsurface. It will enable researchers to better understand managing the wider impacts of subsurface change and monitoring those changes, and it enables technology innovation. And taken together, all those things will enable better informed policy and regulation, they'll raise awareness of geothermal and so on. So in summary, the Glasgow Observatory gives us an unprecedented look into the subsurface. The infrastructure and open data allows researchers to reduce the uncertainties and test technologies for mine water energy towards decarbonised heat for our buildings. So now I'll pass on to Andrew.
Thanks, Alison. And now for something completely different, as they say. Good afternoon, everyone. As Karen and Mike have already mentioned, the energy white paper that was published late last year identifies transport-related emissions as a major contributor to the national carbon footprint. And so the transport sector needs to be addressed as part of the move to a net zero economy. The major proportion of those emissions come from cars, vans and trucks powered by petrol and diesel engines. And from our perspective, the reason we're interested is because transport systems, particularly the automotive systems, are really material intensive, especially so for industrial metals like steel, aluminium and copper. But as the automotive manufacturing sector in the UK and globally transforms to building zero emission vehicles powered by electricity or by hydrogen, they will need increasing amounts of other less well-known metals. And Karen has already mentioned cobalt, but also things like lithium for batteries, but also metals like rare earths and beryllium, which are used in the electric motors and the power systems around those electric motors. So this is a transformation that's happening globally. And it's pushing up, as Karen already mentioned, demand for many of these so-called critical raw materials like cobalt and rare earths. So in response, and as that demand grows, in response to this transformation of the automotive sector, we believe that the primary source of these metals will continue to be material mined from geological deposits. However, our research is aimed at looking at the future, at more sustainable supply chains for these critical raw materials. And we believe that that requires a whole system approach, which will combine understanding deposits in the ground through exploration. These will be mined, but this mined material will also be used alongside increasingly recycled metals as part of a more circular economy. So our research aims to inform this approach to achieving a more secure and sustainable supply of metals and minerals, which are needed to transform the transport sector and other sectors like the energy technology sector, not least renewables. But we also believe it's not just about supply, and we are actively working in our research team to feed into the wider debate around demand management. So it's not just about more and more material, it's about how we use that material more sustainably. How we reduce our material intensity, and start to dematerialize our economy and make more of less. So our research is some of it is along traditional lines, looking at how mineral deposits form, particularly these critical raw materials. But a lot of it now is, as Karen's already said, engaged with looking at how these materials flow through the economy across the world, and how they fit in with a wider sustainability agenda around a more, as we need to move to a more circular economy that's much less carbon intensive. And I'll stop there. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks very much, Andrew. So you've heard that we are doing practical research in those three categories that the government white paper puts out. So power and industry, buildings and transport. We're actively working on the decarbonisation of those areas. So we have 7 minutes or so to answer questions. We have a question already, so I'll read this out probably for Corinna, I think. So, will closed loop geothermal be a game changer in the UK by limiting fluid injection induced seismicity? What do you think?
Yeah, so closed loop is like a technology used in shallow geothermal already, and it's proven there. Now the trend is to go to deep geothermal and trying to apply a similar principle there, sort of using a heat exchanger in the ground to extract the heat from the earth. So I can see three roles for this technology. The one obviously is an extraction technology on its own right. I'm not aware of an operational scheme. I know there's loads of tests in the US. But so to this date, I don't think, and I know there's tests in the UK on a scheme like this, but I haven't seen the economy of those schemes. The second one is like repurposing of existing wells from other sort of extractive industries like oil and gas. I can see great use in that context. And also for, if you want to call it, rescuing unsuccessful wells, perhaps drilled for hydrothermal systems where you don't get the expected yields or permeability. So I think for those three, a technique in its own, when it is proven, for repurposing of wells, as well as for rescuing unsuccessful wells elsewhere, I think I can see great potential for it in that sense.
Thanks very much, Corinna. Another great question here. So great science and research. How do you engage with energy and environmental regulators, which are crucial to adoption of any of these new technologies? So what do you think, Jonathan? I think, how does the CCS team engage with regulators?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, thanks, Mike. So we talk a lot with regulators. The UK storage is focused almost entirely offshore at the moment. That's where CO2 storage is permitted. And so that really means it falls into the jurisdictions of the Oil and Gas Authority and the Crown Estate. And we work with both quite closely. We have regular discussion with them. The OGAU have recently announced a new strategy, which is focused more on supporting the transition to net zero, which is very good, of course. And yeah, we work in partnership with those two. Well, Crown Estate is not a regulator; it's a leasehold. It awards the leases for the storage sites. But the other thing I'd say is the other important aspect of this is not just CO2 storage in isolation, but how it interacts with and works with other users of the environment, particularly in the offshore environment, which is increasingly busy with creation of wind farms, the interconnectors that are being built, so the sand and gravel extraction, fishing, and many other activities. So all these things have to be fitted in, if you like, and the strategic balance has to be made when you're planning the development of all these different industries. So yeah, it's an interesting and very dynamic conversation that we're having with these groups at the moment.
And Corinna, you have some particular work with the Parliamentary Office for Science and Technology. Do you want to say something about that?
Yes, I think so. We've done some work with stakeholders last year and developed the science briefing papers for various topics, which involves regulators. And I'm currently working at the Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology to develop a briefing paper with them on geothermal energy for a wider information and engagement with stakeholders as well.
Thank you very much. Another question on the overseas aspect. So does BGS have sight or interest in the potential for geothermal and critical metals from UK overseas territories? Do you want to have a quick go at that, Andrew?
The answer to that is certainly on the metal side. We have done little bits of work over the years with various overseas territories. The bulk of our work on critical raw materials does take place overseas, but in other sovereign countries. So we have quite a big program of work on critical metals, both in South America and in sub-Saharan Africa. So that's been, I have to say, that's been the principal focus of some of the metallogenesis work that we're currently undertaking outside.
Thanks, Andrew. We've got so many questions that I've got them up on my screen that I can't see the panelists. So another question, I've not heard the Coal Authority and the Oil and Gas Authority mentioned in any of the talks. I know you're working with them. Could you briefly elaborate? Perhaps, Alison, you could just say something about the work we've done with the Coal Authority in the Glasgow Observatory.
Yeah, so we've had an open dialogue with the Coal Authority through the development of the Glasgow Observatory, and really enthusiastic about all the schemes that the Coal Authority are involved in implementing across the UK, looking at mine water energy and the complementary nature of what BGS and the Coal Authority are doing. Also, BGS works very closely with the Coal Authority on a number of joint collaborative projects. So, for example, there was a paper and data set recently released on the temperature of the UK coalfields, which was a joint BGS Coal Authority publication. And that information is all available online. And we are carrying on that collaborative work at the moment, looking at the sources of heat within the coalfields. So there is a close working relationship there, which we hope will grow in the future.
Thanks very much, Alison. I was asked to wrap this up within 25 minutes, so I think we'll probably have to stop questions from there. But I hope you got a nice feel for the kinds of work that the Net Zero community in BGS is doing in answering those questions that the government has posed to us. How do we decarbonize power and industry? How do we decarbonize the heating of buildings? And how do we decarbonize transport? And we are really doing practical work here to achieve that. So thank you very much, all the participants, and thanks for asking the questions. I'll now hand over back to I think Karen and, let me just check. So Karen and Sir Keith. So Sir Keith and Karen, you take over and we'll turn our cameras off. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think it's for Karen and I to round the session off, and Karen will get the last word, as it says, as it goes. But let me just give my thanks to all the people that have presented this afternoon, and but a particular thanks to you, our stakeholders, for your engagement, your questions, and so on. And let me say, I think we've made as good use as is possible to make of a Zoom session, and we very much look forward to engaging with you further. But just as a very short note on a forward look, it's not exactly me looking into a crystal ball, but just noting the sort of challenges and societal challenges, one of which we've been hearing about today, and looked at one of them quite closely. These have a very large geosciences component, and they're not going to, in my view, get less in the future. Indeed, some of them are gaining more urgency and much more momentum, as we've heard. So there is obviously going to be a great and important role for BGS to continue to play in. I note that the international dimension of these is extremely important. I mean, we're a UK-funded organisation to meet a public task. The challenges we're looking at are global, and the international dimension is extremely important. BGS is culturally and pragmatically very well placed, as you've seen, to pursue that international dimension, which I think augurs well for the future. So just as a forward look, I think the present structure of BGS is sound for what lies ahead of us. There's going to be a huge amount to do. It's shown that it's adaptable and can adjust itself to the geoscientific challenges we face. And I will close off in my remarks on a note of optimism and conviction that BGS will, with your help and your engagement, continue to play a significant role in these areas. On that, I'll pass to Karen for the final word.
Thank you very much, Keith. I'm pretty much just going to repeat what Keith says, because I couldn't agree more. Let me also start with thanking everyone who participated, of course, from BGS's side, but especially everyone who participated and listened in and came with questions. Again, I think it would have been nice to have been able to do this in person and have the more sort of casual conversations over coffee and more lively discussions where more than one person can actually kind of be seen at any one time. But I still hope that you got something out of it. And I will really reiterate my message from the beginning that please, if you feel that you did not get your question answered, and if you feel that you were not able to have the discussion that you were hoping for in this forum, please do reach out to us. And we'd be really happily pick up questions and pick up the discussion. And again, I'm really hoping that very soon I will start personally engaging much more directly with many of you. And again, I can only agree with Keith. I'm a huge optimist, and I think that BGS is in a really good place. I think it's like I said before, every solution to pretty much every challenge that we know we'll be facing in society over the next many decades start with geoscience. It starts with the rock, and we do understand that really, really well at BGS, and we are excited about that sort of public task role and about building the capacity to be able to deliver on all of those things. And also we are excited to just be part of the wider UK geoscientific community where there's so much happening right now. So looking forward to meeting many of you, hopefully in person in the year to come. And perhaps at next year's stakeholder event, because we will certainly have one, if not two or three next year in person in various locations across the UK. So hope to see you then, and do reach out if you have any sort of follow-up that you'd like to address with us. Thank you.